Have you ever given everything to a place only to realize when it ends that they never really saw you at all? 18 years. That's how long I showed up early, stayed late, and kept the quiet chaos of a fintech startup turned billion-dollar powerhouse running smoothly behind the scenes. My name is Mark Delaney. I'm 52 years old, and until last Thursday, I was the senior cybersecurity analyst at Arclight Financial Systems in Denver, Colorado. That morning, I didn't lose a job, lost a version of myself I thought was permanent. It happened in less than 2 minutes. My manager, Ethan Barrett, fresh from some executive leadership seminar, said the words like he was reading from a script. Your role has been restructured. Today is your last day. No warning, no discussion, just a soft click as HR locked me out of the network. I said nothing. No questions, no argument, just a nod. You learn a lot about people in the moments when they think you're powerless. Some rush to explain, to cover, to justify. Others stay silent, watching you like a file, being deleted, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Because they forgot one thing. I built the system. And I never stopped watching. For nearly 2 decades, Arclight had been more than a job. It was a second skin, stitched together through late nights, last-minute crises, and quiet victories. No one outside the server room ever noticed. I joined the company when it was just 12 people sharing a half-finished office above a frozen yogurt shop. Back then, my daughter Ellie was in middle school, and my wife Claire still laughed at how I always brought work home, even when there was nothing left to fix. By the time Arclight had grown into a multi-state fintech powerhouse with glass-walled conference rooms and catered lunches, I had become a fixture. Not flashy, not loud, just reliable. I was the guy people came to when the system glitched during a product demo or when client data looked like it had been swallowed by the ether. I recovered everything, every time. I trained the new hires, helped legal navigate security audits, patched bugs at 2 a.m. before anyone even noticed they existed. And I did it without asking for more money, more status, or more credit. To most of the office, I was background noise. The guy in the slightly rumpled blue shirt, always at his desk before the lights came on, sipping cold coffee and typing like the network itself depended on it. Which, truthfully, it often did. But loyalty, it turns out, doesn't scale. Somewhere along the way, as investor rounds got bigger and the company's voice became all about agility and disruption, people like me became relics. Useful, maybe, but not strategic. I was legacy infrastructure in a cloud-native world. And I began to feel it. Not all at once, but in those little shifts you notice only if you've been somewhere long enough to sense when the wind changes. 6 months before I was let go, we got a new department head. Ethan Barrett. MBA, mid-30s. All energy and no depth. He talked like a podcast. Efficiency this, optimization that, and treated our department like a spreadsheet full of expenses he couldn't wait to color code and cut. He never asked how things actually worked, he just assumed they should be faster, cheaper, cleaner. At first I tried to help him understand. I invited him into the server room, explained our patch history, walked him through the logic behind the security layers we'd built over the years. He smiled, nodded, and then ignored everything I said. He wanted dashboards, not context. Metrics, not nuance. Then came the consultant. Lucas Quinn arrived on a Tuesday, unannounced. He wore the kind of suit you don't wear twice and introduced himself like someone used to being the smartest person in the room. Tech Modernization Advisor, Ethan called him. But Lucas didn't ask questions. He observed, took notes, disappeared into closed-door meetings. And every time I passed him in the hallway, he gave me a smile just tight enough to feel like a warning. A few weeks after Lucas showed up, I noticed the first change. My administrative permissions had been quietly altered. Nothing big, just a few restrictions on user access controls. Then my calendar invites started drying up. Projects I usually led were reassigned. Even the weekly cross-departmental syncs, where I was often the one holding things together, went on without me. Still, I kept my head down. Not because I didn't notice, but because I did. Something was happening. And if you've spent your life designing systems to detect vulnerabilities, you learn not to react at the first flicker. You watch. You log. You wait. At home, Claire asked once over dinner if something was bothering me. I told her no. I wasn't lying. Not yet. Instead, I buried myself in quiet routines. I'd walk our dog Milo before dawn, listen to the hum of the house before the neighborhood woke up. I'd show up at the office exactly at 7:58, log into a network that was slowly being taken away from me, and smile at people who no longer looked me in the eye. It was death by subtlety, no overt demotion, no bad performance reviews, just air, slowly leaving the room. What they didn't know, what they'd forgotten, was that the quiet ones often remember everything, and we don't speak until we're ready. That readiness came the day I found the memo, not sent to me, of course, but buried in a shared drive that someone forgot I still had access to. Subject line: Q3 Infrastructure Realignment, Implementation. Schedule. Inside were details about a full departmental restructuring, complete with a new hierarchy, a rebranded cybersecurity division, and a list of retained employees. My name wasn't on it. Lucas Quinn's name was. That was the moment. I stopped being surprised. I didn't get angry. I got precise. Because if they were going to erase me from the company, they should have been more careful. They forgot I built the walls they were trying to hide behind, and I still knew where the cracks were. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not in the sense of silence, offices are rarely silent, but in the way people lower their voices when someone walks by. I wasn't invisible yet, but I could feel the fade beginning. Fewer good mornings, fewer eye contacts. The occasional glance that lasted half a second too long, followed by a sudden interest in email or coffee mugs. If you've ever been ghosted by an entire department, you'll recognize the feeling. It's not loud. It's surgical. The changes were small at first. My weekly update meeting with DevSecOps was rescheduled 3 times, then disappeared entirely. A project I'd been working on for nearly a year, one that involved a full encryption protocol overhaul for client financial records, was reassigned to a junior associate who still asked me what port SFTP used. My access to the incident response logs, something I'd overseen for years, was revoked without comment. No explanation. No discussion. Just blank space where my responsibilities used to be. I kept a low profile, but I wasn't passive. Every change, every removed permission, every reassignment, I tracked them. Quietly. Systematically. That's the thing about engineers. We don't always speak up, but we always log everything. I built a secure personal log at home with mirrored updates, time-stamped with system metadata. Not for revenge, not yet. Just documentation. Something I'd learned long ago. When people start rewriting your history, you better have your own copy. Ethan, meanwhile, became increasingly performative. He began using phrases like legacy drag and cultural friction in team meetings. I was never named, but the implication was clear. Anyone with roots deeper than his own was suspect. He'd pace through open workspaces like a show dog, dropping references to scalability and containerization to people who just wanted to get their jobs done. He loved being seen as a visionary, even if he had no idea how anything worked beneath the surface. And Lucas Quinn, he was everywhere and nowhere. You'd hear his voice on calls, see his initials on working documents, but try to find him in the building and it was like chasing vapor. Every few days I'd catch him in a glass office with Ethan, leaning over a laptop, murmuring like co-conspirators. One time I passed by and heard him say, "We need to move on this before end of I." Quarter, he's still in the loop. I didn't stop. I didn't let my face change. But I made a note. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was the casualness of it. Like I was just another function to be deprecated. No recognition, no conversation. Just the systematic dismantling of 18 years of trust, contribution, and care. They didn't just push me out, they erased me. At home, Claire watched me more closely. I hadn't said much, but she could see it in the small things. How long I stared out the kitchen window at night, The way I checked my phone during dinner but never replied to anything. She didn't press. After 24 years of marriage, she knew when to ask and when to wait. I loved her for that. One evening, I sat on the porch with a notepad in my lap, drawing the architecture of our core systems from memory. Every backdoor, every failsafe, every outdated dependency that still served as connective tissue no one wanted to touch. I wasn't planning anything. Not yet. I was reminding myself what I knew, what they'd forgotten. Then came the final hint, the signal that confirmed everything I'd suspected. While conducting a routine scan on a network endpoint still technically tied to my admin credentials, I came across a flag, an external payment gateway log that didn't match any known vendor profiles. The transaction was routed to a name I didn't recognize, Apex Integrity Partners. The amount was small, just under regulatory reporting thresholds, but it repeated. Monthly, identical invoice formatting, a listed address that, when I ran it through reverse lookup, belonged to a closed co-working space in San Jose. It was nothing, but it was something. I followed it. Slowly, carefully. I didn't alert anyone. I didn't mention it in Slack or bring it up in a security audit. I just watched, because if there's one thing people like Ethan and Lucas never count on, it's that the man they're trying to phase out might still be the most dangerous mind in the room. They thought I was obsolete. They thought I'd leave quietly. They thought wrong. It happened on a Monday. Fitting, really. Mondays already carry a weight of their own, the mental recalibration after a weekend, the quiet anxiety of inboxes filling faster than coffee mugs. But that Monday carried something sharper. I felt it the moment I stepped off the elevator. The silence in the hallway wasn't just the absence of noise, it was presence, a pause, like something waiting. My access badge worked. Barely. There was a 1-second delay before the door to our floor clicked open. I noticed that small things stand out when you're already on alert. Ethan's voice came over my shoulder before I even reached my desk. "Mark, can I see you for a minute?" I didn't reply, just followed him. His office was too clean. No clutter, no coffee. Ring on the desk. Vanessa from HR was already seated. That was the tell. She gave me the kind of smile HR departments reserve for compliance training and layoffs. "This won't take long," Ethan began. No small talk, no window dressing. Just a folder on the desk with my name typed neatly on the tab. "We're moving in a new direction. Your position is being dissolved effective immediately. Please return any company property and coordinate with Vanessa for your exit paperwork." He said it like a dentist delivering news about a cavity. Routine, clinical, painless, at least for him. I nodded once, didn't ask for details. Didn't argue. I had no interest in begging for a seat at a table I'd built from scratch. Vanessa handed me a packet. "We'll offer a severance equal to 3 months' salary, contingent on a signed non-disclosure agreement. You'll also need to forfeit any remaining equity." Standard muzzle. Not surprising. I left the office without a word. Walked past co-workers who couldn't quite meet my eyes. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if I were packing away a version of myself. At my desk, I boxed up what little was mine. A photo of Claire and Ellie at a cabin in Estes Park. A ceramic mug from a company retreat back when we still had those. And a small paperweight shaped like a motherboard, a gift from a junior analyst I'd mentored years ago. No one said anything. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what to say. I left my badge on the desk. As I stepped into the elevator, I turned back just once. Ethan stood outside his office watching. Not saying goodbye, just confirming, making sure the threat had been neutralized. But here's the thing about dismantling a system. If you don't understand how it was wired in the first place, you never know what might trigger when you start pulling pieces apart. And Ethan had just yanked the wrong wire, because what he didn't know was that I'd already seen the rest of the plan. And now, I had one of my own. The parking lot was mostly empty when I stepped outside. Morning sun, sharp and blinding, bounced off windshields like it didn't care who just lost their life's work. I sat in my car with the box in my lap and looked at the building for a long time, not out of sentiment but analysis. That glass tower had been my second home for 18 years, yet in the end, I wasn't even worth a goodbye. I started the engine and drove home without turning on the radio. Silence was better, more precise. Claire was in the kitchen when I walked in. She didn't ask why I was home early. She just looked at me, her hand resting lightly on the counter. "It's done," I said. She nodded. "Coffee?" "Yeah." We sat at the table, not speaking for a minute or two. She reached out and covered my hand with hers. That was enough. After she left for her shift at the hospital, I went upstairs to the office and pulled the blackout curtain. The quiet settled, in thick and steady. I opened the drawer where I kept my personal external drive, encrypted, air-gapped, hidden in plain sight behind an old paperback copy of the mythical Man-Month. There were others stored off-site, but this one was current. Plugged it in. Waited. The screen blinked to life with my mirrored logs. Every system permission change, every document access revocation, every internal notice I hadn't been copied on. I pulled up the vendor data again. Apex Integrity Partners. The name still didn't match any known supplier in our procurement database. But the pattern was clear. Monthly payments, same amounts, increasing slowly, subtly, just beneath most internal alert thresholds, enough to blend into noise. I found the invoice trail. The approval chain led through Lucas Quinn, sign-offs routed through Ethan. But the red flag was this: Apex was billing us for system audit consulting and data hygiene remediation, terms broad enough to be meaningless, but close, enough to real departments that no one would notice without looking closely. They hadn't expected anyone to look closely. I checked the domain registration for Apex. It was masked, of course, hidden behind a Delaware LLC and a privacy protection service. But I found something they missed. An early test invoice from Apex had been forwarded to Lucas's internal email for formatting review. Rookie mistake. I cross-referenced metadata, timestamps, headers. Confirmed it. Lucas Quinn hadn't just introduced the vendor. He'd helped build it, and someone had been using that shell to quietly siphon funds. That's when I felt the shift. Not anger. Not even betrayal anymore, just clarity. This wasn't about me being redundant, it was about me being in the way. I scrolled deeper. Something caught my eye. A shared spreadsheet between Ethan and a procurement officer flagged as confidential. I decrypted a cached version still accessible through my personal logs. It wasn't just Apex. There were others, 3 more shell companies, all with equally bland names. All created within a year of Lucas's arrival, all approved under Ethan's restructured vendor policy, and all paid through the same chain, quarterly retainer agreements for strategic optimization, services that no one in IT had ever heard of. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the data beginning to press into my spine. They hadn't just tried to push me out, they were laundering money, and they thought no one would see it. But I did. Not because I'm brilliant, not because I'm vengeful, because I pay attention. Because when something doesn't add up, I don't let it go. They remove me from the system, but they forgot something basic. Systems remember. I started printing, quietly, selectively, clean, labeled reports, invoice summaries, metadata logs, financial routing records, not for retaliation, for leverage. By the time Claire got home that evening, I'd filled a manila folder and sealed it. She kissed me on the forehead, then noticed the envelope on the desk. "You're not done, are you?" "No," I said quietly. She nodded once. "Good." That night I slept for 5 hours straight, more than I'd expected. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with certainty. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't grieving the job. I wasn't even angry. I had a direction, and that changes everything. By morning, the fog had lifted. I moved deliberately. I scanned every piece of data again, line by line, making sure there were no assumptions. Just evidence. Just facts. I wasn't looking to burn the house down. I was just getting ready to shine a light in the basement. The first step was simple. Isolate everything. I moved all files onto a secure drive, encrypted it with a rolling 256-bit key, and stored a backup in a locked deposit box Claire and I had opened years ago when we still thought safety meant jewelry and documents. I updated a second copy to a private cloud vault tied to an alias account with no direct link to my name. Then I made a list, not of names but of access points. Ethan, Lucas, the procurement officer, one financial controller whose signature appeared twice on questionable contracts, and one wildcard, a senior board member named Marcia Kessler. She'd co-signed a budget proposal that included several of the Shell vendor contracts. Whether she was involved or just misled, I didn't yet know. So I did what I always do when I hit a wall. I researched Marcia Kessler wasn't just a board member, she was the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. That made her important. But what made her valuable was something else. 10 years ago, when I was just another name in the server logs, I'd led an internal investigation during a minor breach. Marcia had been the one to back my recommendations when legal pushed back. She remembered details. She asked real questions. I still had her direct line. I didn't call, not yet. Instead, I built a timeline. A clean, coherent narrative supported by verifiable facts. Nothing speculative, no emotional language, just one quiet, methodical walk through the structure of a fraud. Because the goal wasn't revenge, it was precision, and that's where most people fail. They let anger make their decisions, they swing too early, shout too loud. That's not how systems break. Systems break quietly, subtly, until they can't pretend anymore. I composed an email, not from my main address, but from an internal relay account I'd created years ago for security testing, technically legitimate but no longer listed in the global directory. The kind of account only someone like me would know still existed. Subject line: urgent, vendor activity, financial. Risk flag. I didn't attach everything. Just enough. A handful of payment logs, a sample invoice trail, a note explaining the vendor profiles and their questionable origins. I didn't mention names. Not yet. The goal wasn't exposure. It was curiosity. The kind that pulls decision makers out of autopilot and into alert mode. I scheduled the email to go out at 9:02 a.m. Tuesday morning, 2 minutes after Arclight's weekly risk committee meeting began. Then I waited. Claire watched me that evening with quiet curiosity. "Is this the part where it all starts?" she asked. I shook my head. This is the part where they realize they've lost control of the narrative. At exactly 9:04 a.m. the next day, my phone vibrated. A number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another call. This one I did recognize, Ethan's office line. I let it go to voicemail. Then the text came. "Ethan, Mark, need to speak. Today. It's important." I didn't reply. That afternoon, I got an email from Vanessa in HR. Subject: unofficial follow-up. Request for discussion. Her tone was polite, but the subtext was sharp. Please refrain from circulating confidential material. Any further unauthorized communication may be considered a violation of your exit terms. I smiled. There it was, the reflex of a guilty structure. Threat first, then scramble for control. What? They didn't know. What they couldn't know was that I hadn't sent the report to them. I'd copied Marcia Kessler directly, and if she was anything like I remembered, she was already asking questions. The quiet part was over. The countdown had started. Part 7. The twist. It goes deeper than fraud. I thought I'd uncovered the whole picture. The shell companies, the manipulated vendor payments, the trail that wound quietly from Lucas Quinn's laptop to Ethan Barrett's signature. But I was wrong. That wasn't the story. That was just the surface. The real story was buried deeper. It started with a spreadsheet. 3 days after I'd sent the report to Marcia Kessler, I was combing through archived internal emails I'd mirrored over the last 6 months. System alerts, budget reports, buried access requests. I wasn't looking for more fraud. I was looking for motive. Fraud like this doesn't happen just because someone wants a bonus. It happens because someone needs leverage or cover. That's when I found it. A message dated nearly 8 months ago from Ethan to Lucas, marked confidential. The subject line was vague. Tiered access for sandbox environment. At first glance, it looked like routine technical admin, until I noticed the server ID. It referenced. It wasn't one of ours, not officially. I pulled up our infrastructure map and began checking server names. One cluster, hosted externally but tunneled through an old DevOps subnet, didn't appear on any active documentation. I followed the logs. No one in the IT department had access, not even system admins. But there were traces, metadata pingbacks, masked logins, mirrored file movement from our core financial data warehouse. That's when the alarms in my head started to ring. I'd seen setups like this before, not in fintech, but in government consulting. Shadow environments used to test real-world models against volatile conditions, usually harmless. But when connected to live client data, that's not harmless. That's dangerous. I dug deeper. The off-book cluster wasn't just mirroring financial systems. It was modeling them. Tracking transactional behavior of Arclight's top-tier clients, specifically high-net-worth users whose portfolio activity could trigger market changes. I ran a sample pattern against a publicly available trading timeline. The results were nauseatingly clear. Client behavior was being modeled, packaged, and sent to an outside firm, Shelter Ridge Advisory, an investment group tied indirectly to Lucas Quinn through a former employer. The modeling predicted shifts in investment behavior days before it happened, and Shelter Ridge moved accordingly. This wasn't just fraud, it was insider trading. Executed not by a rogue trader, but by a consultancy pipeline built to exploit access no one was supposed to have. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the audacity of it. The vendor fraud, the payments, the restructuring, all of it was camouflage. The real operation wasn't stealing money from the company. It was stealing insight from its clients. Quietly, systematically. And they thought I wouldn't find it, because I wasn't supposed to. I stared at the screen, the data still blinking at me like it wanted to be understood. And then I knew. This wasn't about getting even anymore. This was bigger than me, bigger than Arclight. This was a violation of trust so deep, so quietly embedded in code and protocol, that even the clients wouldn't know they'd been compromised. Until the damage was done, I began to reassemble my file. Not just the payment fraud. Now I included server maps, transaction echoes, model behavior reports, proof of off-site logins, endpoint access, linked IPs, timestamps. Then I drafted a second message. This one wasn't for Marcia. It was for Alana Rhodes, a senior compliance investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. We'd crossed paths once during a minor industry investigation when Arclight was vetting a foreign partnership. She was tough, focused, and famously resistant to being lobbied. Her name was feared by compliance officers and deeply respected by people like me, the ones who knew what lived in the shadows of financial systems. I attached the updated file, added a brief, clinical explanation. No drama, no accusations, just facts. I didn't send it. Not yet. First, I scheduled the message to Marcia, this time with a full breakdown of what I'd found beyond the fraud. I gave her a choice. She could escalate this internally, quietly, with a clean break. Or I would forward the evidence to the SEC and let the fallout happen publicly. And then I waited, because I knew one thing about people like Ethan and Lucas. They were prepared for exposure, but they weren't prepared for accountability. The reply from Marcia came the next morning at 6:42 a.m., a single line that said more than any corporate memo ever could. I need to see everything. Today. Attached was her private contact number and a meeting link titled Executive Eyes. Only, I didn't hesitate. Within the hour, I had compiled a sanitized, legally tight dossier, one that wouldn't trip NDAs or firewalls, but would reveal the full skeleton beneath Arclight's polished skin. The vendor fraud, the shell companies, the off-book data cluster, the behavioral modeling, the link to Shelter Ridge. At 9:15 a.m. we connected. Marcia's voice was as level as I remembered, but her eyes told the story. She wasn't surprised. She was angry, not the kind that lashes out, but the colder, more dangerous kind that moves with deliberation. "This goes beyond internal cleanup," she said. "I know. I need to act on this before you go outside the company. Can you give me 24 hours? "I can give you 12, I said. "After that, the SEC gets a copy." She didn't argue. By noon, Ethan's name had been flagged on internal audit logs. I knew because someone in IT, someone I'd trained years ago, texted me a screenshot with no commentary. Just a timestamp in the subject line, "Access revoked." At 2:11 p.m., Lucas Quinn was removed from Arclight's authorized vendor list. At 3:07 p.m., an emergency board meeting was called. By 5 p.m., the company's internal Slack was a wildfire of rumors. Consulting audit, executive restructuring, data policy overhaul, the kind of phrases that sound sterile on paper but inside a building carry the scent of panic. I stayed quiet, watched, waited. The next morning, news broke in the financial press. Arclight Financial Systems under internal investigation following. Vendor audit concerns. No names yet, no specifics, but the tide had turned. That afternoon my phone rang. This time I answered. "Mr. Delaney." The voice was formal, cautious. "This is Eric Marchand, Interim General Counsel for Arclight. The board has requested a meeting with you at your earliest availability." "Availability depends," I said. "What's the purpose of the meeting?" "They'd like to discuss how you'd like to proceed, and what steps are needed to protect both your interests and the company's." Translation: they didn't know how much I'd told or to whom. I agreed to a call. No video, no legal documents, just a voice on the line and the sound of very careful breathing. They asked if I wanted to return, not just as a reinstated employee but in a new capacity, one that hadn't existed until yesterday, Chief Integrity Officer, reporting directly to the board, full access, veto authority on vendor contracts, audit protocol, and data privacy oversight. I listened. Then I said the one thing they weren't ready for. Not unless the truth comes out, publicly. Silence. I wasn't bluffing. The world didn't need another sanitized press release or vague commitment to transparency. What Arclight needed, what every client and employee deserved, was the truth and accountability. I gave them a deadline. 48 hours. Full public disclosure, signed cooperation with federal investigators, and a formal apology issued to every affected client. Or I would forward everything to the SEC and 3 journalists I trusted. They called me back in 6. At 7:31 p.m., Arclight released a public statement acknowledging serious internal failures in data governance and vendor oversight, pledging full cooperation with authorities, and confirming that multiple senior executives had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough, for now. By the end of the week, the fallout had begun in earnest. Ethan Barrett disappeared from LinkedIn. Lucas Quinn's name surfaced in a preliminary SEC filing. 2 procurement officers resigned quietly. A third turned whistleblower and corroborated everything I'd found. I received messages, more than I could count. From former coworkers, clients, even people in adjacent industries who'd watched from the sidelines and saw something they hadn't expected. A quiet man who never chased the spotlight. A systems guy with nothing to lose. A person who simply refused to look away. Claire and I took a walk that evening through our neighborhood. The leaves were starting to change, Denver's early autumn pressing gently at the edges of summer. She held my arm a little tighter than usual. "You didn't just bring them down," she said. I looked at her. "You rebuilt the rules. Maybe, maybe not. But I knew this much. They had tried to erase me. Instead, I'd rewritten the narrative. And now the whole company had to read it." The following Monday, I walked into Arclight's headquarters not as an employee, but as a guest. with leverage. The security guard, Daryl, who I used to bring coffee when we were both here before sunrise, gave me a look that blended disbelief with something close to respect. "Back so soon, Mr. Delaney?" "Just visiting," I said. He handed me a guest badge without being asked. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet, unfamiliar. I'd never had a reason to be up here before. This was the floor where decisions got made, where budgets were sliced and lives were rearranged under the guise of strategy. Now they were waiting for me. The boardroom was sterile, polished wood and glass, with 10 seats arranged like they'd been expecting someone more polished, more political. But I wasn't there to impress anyone. Marcia stood as I entered, the others followed. There was a moment of formal silence, the kind that comes before confessions or negotiations. "Mr. Delaney," said Eric Marchand, the interim counsel. "Thank you for coming. The board has reviewed your recommendations and your conditions." I sat and placed a folder on the table. Inside was a single page. 3 conditions. Non-negotiable. Full independent audit authority. Reporting directly to the board, not to executive leadership. Complete oversight of third-party vendors, with veto power over all external procurement related to data systems. Institutional protection for whistleblowers, with a legally enforced channel outside the HR chain. Eric skimmed the document. He didn't flinch, but Marcia raised an eyebrow. "This is unusual." "So was laundering behavioral data through a shadow server," I said evenly. "That happened because no one was looking. I'm not asking for power. I'm asking for oversight." Silence settled again. At 11:12 a.m., they voted unanimous. The position of Chief Integrity Officer would be created immediately. My role would begin in 30 days. I didn't smile. I wasn't here for victory laps. When I stepped outside, Claire was waiting in the car. She'd insisted on driving me that morning, not because I needed a ride, but because she wanted to see the moment. "Well?" she asked. They said yes. She nodded once, pulling away from the curb. "How's it feel?" I looked out the window at the building that once buried me in fluorescent light and now, oddly, felt smaller than I remembered. "Strange," I said. Like I was finally handed the keys to the place they tried to lock me out of. That night I sat in the home office where this had all started and began sketching the new ethics protocol, one designed not to protect the company, but to protect the truth. Because systems don't protect people. People protect people. But only when someone's actually watching. Now someone would be. Mark Delaney didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten, demand, or grandstand. He just paid attention. And in the world of fast-moving decisions, performative leadership, and loyalty measured in quarters, that made him dangerous in the best possible way. He wasn't driven by ego. He was driven by principle. By a quiet belief that systems should serve people, not hide abuse behind them. And when those systems failed, he did what he always did. He fixed the problem. Not with rage, with integrity, with evidence, with clarity. It's easy to overlook people like Mark, until they're the only ones left standing between dysfunction and collapse. If you've ever watched someone underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong, you already know how rare that kind of power is. Tell us about it. We'd genuinely love to read your story in the comments, and if this one stayed with you, consider sharing it. Tap like, subscribe, and let this story be a reminder that quiet strength, when focused, is unstoppable. After all, sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who never needed to say a word.